There is a photograph you have seen 1,000 times. An old man with wild white hair, kind eyes, and his tongue playfully stuck out at the camera. It is the face of Albert Einstein, the ultimate symbol of quirky, lovable genius. We are told he was a saint of science, a pacifist, a man who unlocked the secrets of the universe while wearing comfy sweaters. But what if this entire image is a carefully constructed myth? What if I told you that behind the grandfatherly smile was a cold, narcissistic husband who compiled a list of cruel rules for his wife to follow, demanding she serve him meals in his room and expect no intimacy? What if I told you that his first wife, Mileva Marić, was a brilliant physicist in her own right, who some historians claim was the uncredited co-author of his most famous works? And what if I told you that he abandoned his children and used the money from his Nobel Prize to silence his family? The man who gave us the theory of relativity couldn't navigate the simple physics of human empathy. Today, on Deconstructing Minds, we are performing a psychological autopsy on the most famous scientist in history. We are not here to talk about E equals mc squared. We are here to talk about the collateral damage of genius. Was Einstein a benevolent god of physics, or was he a man so lost in the cosmos that he became blind to the human suffering he caused in his own home? Let's deconstruct the dark side of the world's most brilliant mind. To understand the tragedy of Einstein's personal life, we must go back to Zurich Polytechnic in 1896. Young Albert was a charismatic but lazy student. He skipped lectures, he argued with professors, and he was obsessed with one thing: solving the puzzles of the universe. And in his class, there was a woman who was just as brilliant, if not more so. Mileva Marić. She was the only woman in their physics section. She was from a small Serbian village. She had a limp, and she was pathologically shy. But her mind was a powerhouse. She was a gifted mathematician, a meticulous researcher, and the perfect intellectual partner for the chaotic, undisciplined Albert. They fell deeply, passionately in love. Their early letters are filled with talk of our theory and our work. Psychologically, this was a symbiotic intellectual partnership. Albert was the big idea guy. Mileva was the one who did the rigorous mathematical proofs and checked the work. He called her his little witch who kept him grounded. But then the darkness began to creep in. In 1902, before they were married, Mileva became pregnant. She travelled back to Serbia alone to have the child, a girl named Liesl. And then the baby disappears from history. We don't know if she was given up for adoption or if she died of scarlet fever. What we do know is that Einstein likely never saw his firstborn daughter. He simply erased her from his life. This is the first major psychological red flag. It shows a terrifying capacity for emotional detachment and compartmentalization. He could weep over a mathematical formula, but he could remain cold and distant to the fate of his own child. The man who wanted to understand the universe had no interest in understanding the consequences of his own actions. This was a pattern that would define his entire life. By 1914, the passionate romance between Albert and Mileva was dead. Einstein was now a celebrated professor in Berlin, on the cusp of publishing his masterpiece, The General Theory of Relativity. He had fallen in love with his cousin, Elsa Löwenthal. But divorce was a messy, scandalous affair, so instead of leaving, Einstein presented Mileva with a contract, a list of rules she had to follow if she wanted to remain his wife for the sake of their 2 sons. This document is not a philosophical text. It is a manual for narcissistic abuse. The rules were as follows. A. You will make sure that my clothes and laundry are kept in good order, that I will receive my 3 meals regularly in my room, that my bedroom and study are kept neat, and especially that my desk is left for my use only. B. You will renounce all personal relations with me insofar as they are not completely necessary for social reasons. You must not expect any intimacy from me. C. You will obey the following points in your relations with me. You will not sit with me in my room. You will stop talking to me if I request it. This is not a marriage. It is a master-slave dynamic. On Deconstructing Minds, we see this as a terrifying display of objectification. Mileva was no longer his intellectual partner. She was a domestic appliance, a servant whose only purpose was to create a silent, orderly world so that the great genius could think. Why would a man who fought against the authoritarianism of governments create such a tyrannical regime in his own home? Psychologically, this is a manifestation of compensatory control. The universe was vast, chaotic, and mysterious, but his house? That was a system he could control absolutely. He couldn't command the stars, but he could command his wife to stop talking to him. This contract reveals a man who was so terrified of the messiness of human emotions that he tried to regulate them with the cold, brutal logic of a physics equation. Mileva, unsurprisingly, could not live under these monstrous conditions. She left him, taking their sons with her. The divorce proceedings were long and bitter. Einstein had no money to offer for child support, but he had an idea. He had an absolute, unshakable belief in his own future greatness. So, he made Mileva a bizarre and cynical offer. He promised her that when, not if, but when, he won the Nobel Prize, he would give her the prize money. In exchange, she had to grant him a divorce and, implicitly, her silence. Think about the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of this. In 1919, he hadn't even been nominated yet. He was using a hypothetical future triumph as a bargaining chip to get rid of his family. In 1921, Albert Einstein won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And, to his credit, he kept his word. The money was transferred to Mileva. But this wasn't an act of generosity. It was a transaction. It was hush money. He was paying her for her past scientific contributions, for raising his children, and most importantly, for her silence about his affairs and the truth of their early collaboration. Psychologically, this shows a man who viewed human relationships through a transactional lens. Love, loyalty, and history could all be quantified and paid off like a debt. Mileva used the money to care for their youngest son, Edward, who suffered from schizophrenia and spent much of his life in a psychiatric asylum. Einstein, who had by then remarried his cousin Elsa and moved to America, rarely saw his schizophrenic son again. He was busy becoming the world's most famous human being. He solved the mysteries of the cosmos, but he left the black hole of his own family to collapse in on itself. After fleeing Nazi Germany, Einstein settled into a comfortable life at Princeton University. He became the face of gentle, academic pacifism. He publicly argued against war and nationalism, becoming a moral icon for a world on the brink of self-destruction. But in 1939, a dark shadow fell over his idealism. His fellow scientists, Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, came to him with terrifying news. They believed that Nazi Germany was on the verge of splitting the atom and creating a weapon of unimaginable power, an atomic bomb. They needed to warn the American government, but no one in Washington would listen to a group of immigrant scientists. They needed a name with gravity. They needed Einstein. Psychologically, this was the ultimate moral dilemma. Einstein, the lifelong pacifist, was being asked to help initiate the creation of the most destructive weapon in human history. To remain silent was to risk a world ruled by a nuclear-armed Hitler. To speak up was to betray his most sacred principle. He chose to speak. He signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt urging the United States to start its own atomic research. This letter directly led to the Manhattan Project and the bombs that would later incinerate Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Einstein did not work on the bomb himself. He was considered too much of a security risk, but he was its godfather. After the war, he was consumed by a profound, agonizing guilt. He famously said, "I made one great mistake in my life, when I signed the letter to President Roosevelt." He called himself the father of the bomb, a title that haunted him until his death. This is the ultimate irony of his life. The man who could see the invisible fabric of space-time was utterly blind to the predictable, brutal logic of human politics. He thought he was arming the good guys against the bad guys, only to realize that once a weapon of absolute power is unleashed, everyone becomes a monster. His beautiful equations had given humanity the tools to commit suicide, and he knew it. Albert Einstein died in 1955 at the age of 76. He left behind a legacy that has two faces. There is Einstein the scientist, the titan who overthrew Newton and gave us the universe. And then there is Einstein the myth, the gentle, quirky, sock-hating grandfather who became the secular saint of the 20th century. On Deconstructing Minds, our autopsy reveals that the myth was a necessary illusion. We need to believe that our greatest minds are also our best people. We need to believe that genius and goodness go hand in hand. But Einstein's life teaches us a much harder, more uncomfortable truth. Intellectual brilliance has no correlation with emotional intelligence. He was a man who could comprehend the cosmos, but he could not comprehend the emotional needs of his own wife. He was a man who felt empathy for all of humanity, but he struggled to feel it for his own children. He was a man who preached peace, but his signature helped unleash the most violent weapon in history. We don't deconstruct Einstein to tear down his scientific achievements. We deconstruct him to humanize him. He wasn't a god. He was a deeply flawed man who was brilliant at one thing, physics, and catastrophically bad at almost everything else. His story is a warning. In our modern cult of genius, we often forgive our idols for their cruelty, their narcissism, and the collateral damage they cause. We tell ourselves it's a small price to pay for their greatness. But Einstein's silent, suffering wife and his abandoned schizophrenic son are a testament to the real cost of that price. He was a star who burned so brightly that he cast a very long, very dark shadow. And in that shadow, we find the messy, uncomfortable, and deeply human truth about the nature of genius itself.